Again, welcome to the Kentucky Master Naturalist Summer Zoom series, the first of 4 that we have scheduled this August, and they will be the next 3 Fridays as well at 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 o'clock Central. Today's topic is bats, and we'll get to that in just a minute. I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping with our participants. If you are a current Master Naturalist, you've already graduated from the program, make sure you keep track of this 1-hour session that you're watching. You self-report your continuing education hours, but just keep track of it because you can apply this to your continuing education hours. And if you're a cooperative extension personnel, make sure if you haven't, go into CURS and sign up for this program so that you can receive your 1 credit hour towards your career ladder in CURS as well. And at the end of the program, I will briefly talk a little bit about some other additional things that we have coming up, some opportunities for Master Naturalists and people who maybe are interested in becoming a Master Naturalist. And I guess I should introduce myself. I didn't do that at first, but I'm Laurie Thomas, and I'm an extension forester, which means I'm an educator about forestry in the University of Kentucky's Department of Forestry Cooperative Extension Service. And Dr. Ellen Crocker, who's co-coordinator of the Kentucky Master Naturalist with myself, she's not able to join us today, but she will be joining us at next week's session. So she sends her hellos along to everyone else. So let me just, I want to again welcome you, and let's go ahead, and I'd like to introduce our speaker this morning. We have Gregg Janos, who's a biologist with Copperhead Consulting firm. He is a terrestrial wildlife biologist, and he predominantly studies bats. He received his undergraduate degree in wildlife management from Eastern Kentucky University and got his master's degree in biology from Bowling Green State University, where bats were the focus of his thesis. His work at Copperhead has allowed him to travel extensively throughout the eastern United States, working on a variety of bat projects for threatened and endangered species. And though bats make up the bulk of his work, he also enjoys doing raptor nest surveys, avian point count surveys, and freshwater mussel surveys. So welcome, Gregg. We really appreciate you joining us today to share your knowledge and information about the beautiful bats. I mean, a very important part of our ecosystem. So we're really glad to have you, and thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thanks for asking me to do this. Looking forward to it.
Great. So as people, if you all have questions, just pop those in the chat pod. And if it seems appropriate, if they're going on through the talk, if it seems appropriate, I'll be monitoring that and I'll interrupt Gregg. And if not, we can hold those questions till the end as well. So be listening close. And if you've got questions, make sure you ask those. And Gregg would love to have some give and take, some back and forth with you all as well. So again, thank you, Gregg. We appreciate you joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Let's get titled this talk, Bats Misunderstood and Underappreciated, kind of like Batman, kind of somebody who nobody really fully understands and often are underappreciated, but bats are immensely important to our ecosystems. So to start with, we'll just get a couple myths out of the way. One of the most common ones is that bats get caught in people's hair. I guess that comes from the fact that they often fly erratic, they fly low, catching bugs. So people sometimes think they get caught in your hair. They're not going to get caught in your hair. They have no reason to get caught in your hair. They're not going to build a nest in your hair and lay eggs. They don't do either of those things. A lot of people think that all bats have rabies. Certainly not the case. About 1% of bats are thought to have rabies, so it's a very small proportion. You're more likely to come in contact with raccoons or opossums, but the fact that a lot of times the only time the public interacts with a bat is because it is sick. So that's why it often gets a bad rap. Their eyesight is very comparable to our eyesight. They mainly utilize echolocation to navigate, but they certainly can see pretty decent. And then lastly, that bats are flying rodents, and they do fly, but they are not rodents. They are in a completely separate group from the rodents. Bats are the only mammals that are capable of true flight. Other mammals that sugar gliders, or what we have here in the eastern US, are flying squirrels. Those guys do not fly, they glide. They jump out of the trees, open their arms with folds of skin between the front and hind legs, and glide to and from trees. Whereas bats utilize their arms to actively flap and fly, and they are the only mammals who are capable of doing that. There are over 1,000 species of bats worldwide. They're immensely diverse and comprise 20 to 25% of all mammalian species in the world. So a lot of people don't realize just how diverse the bats are, but there are a lot of them, and they cover a lot of niches within the ecosystems. So most of our, or all of our bats we have over here in the eastern US are insectivores. So they feed solely on insects, mosquitoes, flies, moths, beetles, you name it. In other parts of the world, we have fruit bats, which are there in the middle. I should think of the flying foxes, those really big bats that people see typically in zoos. Those guys are really important, and they serve the role of seed dispersers, since they're eating the fruit, flying around and spreading those seeds throughout the forest. So they're important in seed dispersal and forest regeneration. The one on the right is I believe is a Mexican long-nosed bat that I had the privilege to catch earlier this year. These guys are nectar feeders, so they are very important in pollinating plants. Got those really long noses, really long tongues to get into the flowers to get the nectar. And while doing so, they are pollinating the plants similarly to butterflies and a lot of insects. And bats are the pollinators of agave, which makes tequila. So if anybody likes tequila, then you can thank the bats for that. And then lastly, probably one of the more common ones that people think of, in addition to like flying foxes, are vampire bats. These are ones that may not be the cutest of bats in the world, and probably why people have fears of bats is they think about vampire bats and bats sucking your blood. There's only 3 species of vampire bats in the world, and I believe all 3 are in South America, South and Central America. So you don't have to worry about them here. And even those down there feed predominantly on livestock and deer, but there's only 3 species. They make up a very small portion of the bats in the world.
Hey, Greg, quick question is the vampire bat, is he the bottom guy in the picture?
Yes, the bottom.
Perfect.
Yes, the bottom left.
Okay, awesome. That's what I thought. I could see those little teeth. So
Yep. So bats over here in the US, they can eat approximately 1,000 mosquito-sized insects an hour. So they have big appetites and can do a number on mosquitoes and really any insects that are around. They probably don't eat quite as many insects as we'd like them to, just because there's not much meat on on a mosquito. They're mostly legs and wings. So given the choice, they're going to go after flies, moths, beetles. They certainly do eat mosquitoes, but probably not quite as many as we wished they would. And certainly during the summer when the bats are pregnant and raising young, they can eat their weight in insects a night. So they are immensely important to controlling insects. This figure came from a few years ago, so it might be a little more, but regardless, insects save the US billions of dollars every year in the agriculture industry. So they're immensely important in pest control that damage crops, other flower, your gardens, what have you. So they're immensely important in that regard. And a lot of times people they don't realize that they don't see what value bats have. And I like to tell people that bats essentially are serving the same purpose as birds, but at night. So your birds during the day are dispersing seeds. They are, some of them might be pollinating, most of that's insects, but the seed dispersal and insects are the big things for birds. And bats serve those exact same purposes, except at night. And unfortunately, our bat populations are declining in the US. You may have heard of Whitenose Syndrome, and that has been the main cause. Before Whitenose Syndrome, it was really habitat loss is what was decreasing, causing a decline in bat species. And that continues to be an issue. But with the arrival of Whitenose Syndrome, which came from Europe in 2006, I think is when it was first discovered, it has spread across the US and continued to decimate bats. So this is the most recent map I was able to find of the spread of Whitenose Syndrome. And it's native to Europe. It doesn't affect European bats. They've evolved with this fungus, and so they will have it, but it doesn't seem to bother them. However, when it got brought over here, we're uncertain how it got here, probably through caving or maybe a stowaway bat or something. It got over here, our bats had no exposure to it, and it has decimated them. And so this map shows the red X is where it was found up here in New York. And as time has gone by, it spread north up into Maine, and it really followed the Appalachians down south and has continued to spread south and westwardly. There were a couple big jumps out to Washington and California, and those were thought that potentially cavers had brought that over there. And not hating on cavers. I cave during the winters myself, and I love it. You have to be careful about your equipment when you go into caves to make sure you clean it. Otherwise, you can spread it. So this is what Whitenose Syndrome is. It's a fungus that it grows on exposed skin of bats. So this is a photo of, it looks like little brown bats, and their muzzles are white. That is the fungus that's growing on them. You can see the fungus on their forearms and Doesn't look like any of them had it on their ear. Oh, that one has it on its ear. So it also grows on their ears. So any exposed skin, the fungus will grow on. And what it does is it irritates them. So it wakes them up, and while they're hibernating. It's only a problem when they're hibernating. They can carry the spores in the fungus during the summer. It doesn't grow. The fungus, unfortunately, thrives in climates that bats like to hibernate in. So that's when it becomes a problem. It irritates them. It wakes them up. And so during the winters, they're burning fat and energy that they should be saving to get them through the winter. And instead, they're being woken up, cleaning themselves. And so they eventually in starvation and will come out during the winter when bugs are few and far between, and they often die. And we've got 3 species here in the US that have been hit extremely hard by it. The northern long-eared bat is one of them. I remember when I started doing bat work, I think my first summer as a technician was in 2008. And I remember catching them a lot. They were one of the more common bats we caught. And now they're very difficult to come across. And it is solely because of Whitenose syndrome that their numbers have declined. And it's thought that they've declined about 90%, their population has. In addition to the northern long-eared bat, little brown bats and tricolored bats have been hit very hard. Neither of those are listed at the moment, listed as either threatened or endangered. So they will more likely than not be added to the list in the coming years. So a little bit about what we get to do when we do go caving. We do winter hibernacula counts, where we go into the caves on the right, or on the left side of the screen. So sometimes we get to rappel into caves, which is really cool. Other times they're just caves you can walk in or crawl into. But we go into these caves. We have our tieback. That's just a layer of protection to help us prevent spreading Whitenose syndrome or any other potential pathogens that are in that cave to other caves. So we go into these caves, and the main goal is to locate the bats, count them. First off, identify the species, count them, which when they're in really big clusters like this photo at the very top is pretty challenging to do. So a lot of times what we'll do when there are that many bats in a cluster, we take a photo of it, bring it back to the office, and pull it up in ArcGIS and count noses, and it makes life a lot easier. So we identify the species, we get a count of the species, and then we also document any signs of Whitenose syndrome. If we find dead bats, we might collect those to send those off. At this point, most all caves in Kentucky have been infected with Whitenose syndrome, and if they haven't been, if there hasn't been a confirmed Whitenose case from there, it's more likely than not already there. We just haven't confirmed it. And think about caves. I think that's about it. But it's only in the winter when we do it, when we are trying to get an estimate of population size, because you can't really do that during the summer because the bats mostly are dispersed in the woods. So the only time to really get an accurate population count is during the winter when they are all together in caves. Now, not all bats roost the same in caves. So here on the left side, We have some big-eared bats. Looks like maybe Townsend's big-eared bats and Virginia's big-eared bat on the bottom. Those guys will roost in large clusters. Every now and then you see them roosting individually, but they roost in clusters. A lot of bats typically will roost in clusters. The bottom right is a cave with gray bats in it. That was probably one of my favorite caves to count. It's immensely difficult to get an accurate count on them. So this one, when bats are that dense in the cave, you can't even take photos of them and count noses. There's just too many of them. They wake up quickly and begin flying around, so you have to move fast. And so we use little 1 by 1 meter, I think it's 1 by 1 meter grids and PVC, kind of put this grid up to the ceiling and try and estimate how many bats are in that grid. And then from there on, you're just counting, a half a grid, 1 grid, a quarter of a grid. And we use that to kind of get an estimate, because those bats will wake up quick. And it's kind of like in the, as a Batman Begins, or one of those movies where bats are just like flying around, swirling in the cave. That is exactly what it's like. It's pretty wild. We do our work as quickly as we can. The bats do wake up multiple times during the winter. But when we go in there, we certainly do disturb them, so we try to be quiet, do it as quickly as possible, and that way keep that arousal to a minimum. And then lastly, this is a TriColor bat here at the top. These guys, little bats, and they will roost individually, and they're often found just coated in moisture. So it's just a little fuzz ball that's got all sorts of dew attached to it. All right, so typically I like to ask people how many bats are in Kentucky. And sometimes you get, people don't really know. A lot of times you have people who think like, oh, there's a couple brown bats, like you got 2 or 3. Other times, certainly when I give talks like kids, they're usually very ambitious and thinking we have 100 or so. We don't have quite that many, but we typically have more than most people think we have. And that is 15. Occasionally we might get a 16th bat, that being a Brazilian free-tailed bat. Those guys are habitat generalist and have expanded their range quite a bit. And so we do get those occasionally in Kentucky, but by and large, we have 15 bats we can find here, some more common than others. We have 2 big-eared bat species. Those guys are photoed in the top corners. We have, I believe it's 5 or 6 Myotis species. These guys are the Indiana bat and the long-eared bat and the gray bat. Those are our 3 endangered species, or Indianas and grays are endangered. Long-eared is threatened. We also have little brown bats and eastern small-footed bat, which is the small guy below the 15. In addition to those, we have 4 to, I guess, 5, depending on how you want to classify them, what we call our tree bats. These are bats who roost in the foliage. They have furry tail membranes. These are the Hoya Bat, which is on the far left, very colorful bat. The one right next to it's the silver-haired bat, black with frosted hair tips. And then the Seminole is there below the silver-haired, and then the red bat. Those are all Laziurans. Those are considered tree bats. But in addition, you can kind of throw in the TriColor bat, which does not have, it's not very closely related to the Laziurans, but this bat does roost amongst the foliage. Speaking of roosting, bats roost in a wide variety of places. So first up with the cave photo, gray bats will roost year round in caves. So a lot of times people just think bats live in caves, and well, certainly one species does, at least over here in the US. Other places, there are cave dwelling bats year round. But here in the eastern US, the gray bat is a cave obligate. So it uses caves year round. It does not use the same cave in the winter as it does in the summer. So they have hibernacular cave, and then they have summer maternity caves that they will move to. Most of the bats, after winter, they come out of hibernation, leave that cave, and will roost elsewhere. Sometimes they're in barns or houses, which do not. Typical bats and little brown bats are the most common ones that will roost in man-made structures, and therefore probably the ones that most people are familiar with, and probably why people think, oh, we've just got brown bats. The big-eared bats will sometimes utilize man-made structures, but the big-eared bats are very sensitive to disturbance. So if they do use any man-made structures, they are typically abandoned and not used because they do not like disturbance. They don't handle that very well at all. Bats will also utilize bridges. I mentioned bark. So a lot of the bats come out of their caves, and they then spend their summer up under exfoliating bark. This photo up here in the top left. And split tree crevices, anything they can kind of get wedged up under, and they will raise their young there. And then those bats I mentioned being the tree bats, the Laziurans. This is a photo on the right that I took of a red bat roosting on a, I don't remember what type of shrub it was, but it wasn't very high. But the only reason I found this bat was because it had a transmitter on it, which I'll talk about that in a little bit. But they roost up among the leaves, and they just look like a dead leaf hanging there. They're one of my favorites because they're really cool in that they have furred tail membranes, and so they use that furry tail as kind of a blanket. Because unlike the other cave-dwelling bats that winter in caves, these guys, occasionally you'll find a silver-haired bat at the entrance of a cave, but red bats, Hoya bats, Seminoles, these guys do not winter in caves. They're highly migratory, so they'll migrate south, and they typically will, if they don't move far enough south where they can stay active year-round, they will hibernate in the leaf litter. So they will curl up in a ball, wrap themselves up in their tail membrane, and spend the winter up on the leaf litter. So speaking about these red bats, these are red bats on the top, Seminoles on the bottom. You can see that they've got these furry tail membranes, and they're absurdly soft when we catch them. Red bats are very common. Seminoles not quite as common in Kentucky. They're a little more common out in the western part of the state. Reds are everywhere, but they're really cool. One thing about while I'm talking about handling bats, in order to do so, never handle a wild bat, even though chances of them having rabies is very low. You do not want to handle them because there's always that potential. We have all received our post-exposure vaccinations against rabies that allows us to handle the bats safely. But anyway, red bats and Seminoles are really neat in that they are sexually dimorphic. So most bats, just simply by looking at the back of them and everything, their colorations, everything looks the same. But with reds and Seminoles, a lot of times when we catch them in the net, you walk up to the net, you can tell whether it's a male or female simply by the color of them. So the females in both species have a lot more white frosted frosting on the tips of their fur. And the males, in the case of the reds, not much white frosting on them. The same way with the Seminole bat. They're much darker in coloration, but they don't have that level of white frosted tip hair. So those guys are really cool in that regard. Hoya bats are our largest bat that we have here in the eastern US. They're also one of my favorites. They're really pretty bats. They also have males and females have that white frosting on the tips of their fur. Super pretty. We don't catch them a whole lot because these guys fly high. They specialize on large moths and moths and beetles that are flying high. So we don't catch them a whole lot. Typically, we'll catch them over water when they're coming down to get something to drink, or if we are netting large landscapes that are heavily ag, we will put nets out into an ag field, and sometimes we will catch them that way. But these guys have can have a wingspan of up to about 16 inches, and we've had pregnant females top out our scales, which most of our scales go to about 50 grams or 30 grams. So we've had some that weighed more than 30 grams. And a gram, to give you an idea, is about the weight of a paper clip. So in the grand scheme of things, they're still very light, but in the world of bats, 30 grams. So going from one extreme to the next, to our smallest bats that we have over here in Kentucky, probably pretty much tied between the TriColor bat here on the left and the eastern small-footed bat on the right. Both of these guys are very small, maybe 8 to 10 inches, and only weighing a handful of grams, 5-6 grams. There's not much to them, especially when you catch even like a red bat, and then catch which a red bat's kind of in the middle to high end of the size on the bat scale. Catching one of those and then catching a TriColor bat is just night and day difference. TriColor bats are neat in that their name comes from the 3 different colors of their fur. At the base of their fur, it's like a dark grayish black. The middle is kind of blonde, and then the tips of their hair are this medium brown colored. They're also characterized by their really pink forearm. So that pink forearm sticks out pretty distinctly against their wing membranes. And speaking of wing membranes, I meant to mention this before, but if you didn't know, bats' wings are comprised of 5 fingers, just like ours. And they mainly use that one that's kind of obvious in these photos that's sticking out. That's their thumb, and then the rest of their wing is comprised of 5 fingers. They're just heavily elongated that serve as their wings. And then on the right, we have the eastern small-footed bat. These guys are neat in that not only they're really small, but they have what we like to, their face kind of looks like they have a raccoon type face. They got a very black mask contrasting their brown fur. So when you look at them from the front, you can see that black face. And these guys have very dark forearms, unlike the pips. The TriColor bats used to be called pips, but due to a taxonomic change a couple years ago, they're now TriColored. I still kind of use the names interchangeably, but unlike the TriColoreds, which have pink forearms, the small-footed bats have very dark black forearms. The main way that bats are studied over here during the summer is via mist nets. So that's the photo up here in the top left. It's just a very fine mesh net that if you've ever captured birds, it's the same thing. It's just a little bit finer. So the bats, we set these up typically over waterways, forested corridors, anything that can funnel the bat to the net. Because if you just stick it out in the open, you're not going to catch anything. The bats can certainly see the net right around sunset. But as it gets darker, it's more difficult for them to see it. So then they rely on their echolocation to detect it. And with it being very thin net, they typically can't detect it, but I've walked up to it many of times, and they know there's a net there, and they're trying to get around it. They'll be flying back and forth right in front of it, trying to find a way around it. So they can detect it with to some extent. So that's why you like to have them up under the trees and corridors, so that they're just flying down that corridor and hit the net, and they drop down into a pocket, get tangled up, and then we come and rescue them, although they probably don't see it as being rescued from the net. We take them out, identify what species it is, whether it's male or female. We weigh them and we measure their forearm. Some projects we'll just go ahead and band them. That way, if they're caught again, we know where they came from. Capturing a banded bat is pretty uncommon out on the landscape. It's tough to do, but you do see it in caves, and so that's when we kind of get an idea of how far these bats have moved. We also figure out what age they are, and you can determine the age of a bat by looking at the joints on their wings. So here on the left is a juvenile bat, and when you're looking at the wings, you come down and you can see their finger joints, and light is shining through those joints. The joints are long and they're not fully grown and fused together, and so light shines through them. As they get older, and this happens pretty quickly, this time of year already, it is difficult to tell juveniles from adults. So the juveniles were born back in late May and into June. And so already at this time of year, their joints are beginning to look somewhat more like adults here on the right. And so as an adult, that joint is a tight ball or a knot, and light won't shine through it. At this point, the juvies, light's probably not shining through their joints, but their joints aren't quite as tight of a knot as an adult who's a couple years old. I mentioned after we capture them, putting bands on, and if we want to find out where they're roosting and looking for a maternity roost, we attach transmitters to them. Is maybe the size of your pinky fingernail. And these are Indiana bats, so we do a lot of work with Indiana bats because they're federally endangered. And so what we do is we trim the hair between their shoulder blades, which is what we're doing up here in the top left. Trim their hair, and then we put some surgical glue on their back. So after about a month, this glue gets dried up and the transmitter will fall off and the hair grows back, and you'll never know that it had a transmitter on it. So we put glue on their back. Down here in the bottom left, we're attaching that transmitter to them, let it cure a little bit. And then here on the right, that bat is ready to go. And so we will track the bats from the air using an airplane. It makes life a lot easier to locate them. because they can quickly get out of range of our receivers, which on a good day might be, man, maybe a mile. So from the plane, you have a lot larger range, a lot easier to find these bats. And so we can follow the bats at night while they're moving via the plane. And then during the day, the plane can also go up and say, hey, the bat is here. And then the ground crew will go out with their receiver, walk to that point. Typically, you can hear the bat from that location, and you can track that bat to its exact tree and find out what tree they're using. And then we'll often sit there at night and count how many bats come out. And that's always really neat to watch. And so we do this for typically Indianas, but it depends on the projects. I was on a project earlier this year where we were putting transmitters on red bats, which are very common. But the client was just interested in where they were going and what they were doing. And then lastly, not bat related, but kind of sort of. Even though I do a lot of bat work, we see all sorts of other critters out in the woods, from catching bugs in the net, which are always kind of neat, but unfortunately difficult to get out of the net alive. But lots of insects. Sometimes you catch birds right at sunset as they're flying to their nest. You'll catch birds, which is, I like birds a lot, so it's always kind of fun to nab those guys. And then yeah, you just see lots of salamanders or frogs, things of that sort at night while you're sitting there. We check the nets every 10 minutes. So if it's a slow night and you're not catching bats, you go out and just kind of wander around and see different things. Sometimes this guy on the bottom kind of left the bird with its mouth gaping open as a Chuck Will's widow that we caught. So those are night birds, and caught a couple of those, and those are always really neat. So we get to see lots of animals at night while we're doing our bat work. And then lastly, if you're really interested in learning more about bats, Copperhead has put together 2 documentaries over the past, I don't know, 5 to 8 years, something like that. But our first one is the spring migration of the Indiana bat. And this is a research project that Copperhead's been doing for, I don't know, many years. And we decided to make a documentary on it. And essentially it's talks about us going in, finding these bats in the caves. We put transmitters on them. And this happens in the spring. And we follow the bats with the plane to find out where they go during the summer. And the whole premise of it is to locate new maternity Indiana bat roost. So there's a link to that. That video, if you just Google search spring migration of Indiana bat, should pop up. And the same way for a home for endangered bats, if you Google that, it should show up. That one is about Brandon bark, which is an artificial roost structure that Copperhead has developed, a joint effort between Copperhead and Fort Knox. And it just talks about this artificial roost structure that we have developed, the successes we've had with it, how it can be used, things of that sort. And it kind of follows a project that we did several years ago. So if you're interested in documentaries, they're both about 20 minutes, and feel free to look those up, and hopefully you enjoy those. And with that, that is all I have. So I'm happy to get into questions and whatever anybody else wants to talk about.
All right, so Greg, we'll go back to, we had a question. When you were talking about the different species, someone asked, will you find all species all over Kentucky, or are they just in particular areas? Like, do we have, the Indiana bat just in a certain area or whatnot?
Yeah, so most of them are pretty, too far, pretty widespread throughout the state. There we go. Some are found in certain regions. So the big-eared bats are found more in the eastern part of the state, and the Appalachians, along with small-footed bats. Those guys are only in the east part of the state. Bats and southeastern bats. I think I forgot to mention those. Those guys are typically only found in western Kentucky. And then your Indianas, your big browns, your little browns, hories, evening bats. I haven't mentioned those yet either. Those guys are found statewide. So most of them, yes, statewide. A handful of them are only in specific regions.
Okay, great. Let's see, we've got another question after that. It says, does installing bat houses help? I get that question a lot too. And if you do install one, where should you put it, and any kind of specifics that might be helpful?
Yep. Bat houses certainly do help. When I mentioned habitat loss, since a lot of these do roost under bark or in tree crevices, a lot of those trees get cut down, especially if they're at parks. They might be cut down because of a hazard, or if they're on people's properties. If they're not a hazard, people just don't want to look at dead trees. They'll cut them down. So habitat loss has been an issue, and therefore the bat houses do help. And sometimes people do set those bat houses up in hopes of, all right, I want them out of my attic. Or the case, a lot of times you'll have to definitely exclude them from the house because bats like where they live. So if you take that option away, then they will sometimes move into those houses. So yes, the houses help. You can't put them up and expect them to be used immediately. It will take some time for the bats to find them, and putting them in the right location is important. And that location would be somewhere that gets plenty of solar exposure. A lot of times people will put bat houses up and they'll just put them on the side of a tree in the woods. They're probably not going to get a whole lot of use, with any use, if they are placed there. They need to be, if on a tree, on the outside edge of a tree, like facing out into a field, that's going to get some solar exposure. Same way some people do put them on houses. You just need to put it on the side of a house that gets plenty of solar exposure, typically the south side of a house. Ideally, you'd put them on a pole, whether it be a aluminum fence pole that's 15, 20, 25, 30 feet up, or like an old telephone pole, or an old tree maybe that you've cut down, something like that. Put it out kind of more in the open. You don't want to put it in the middle of a field. So kind of near the tree line, but also out away enough that they will get enough solar exposure, because the bats, when they're raising their young, they don't thermoregulate really well, at least the young don't. So that's why they like really warm, sunny places.
Great. I was going to say, if you would, you can stop screen share now, Greg, and that can help sometimes with the lag a little bit. We do have another question. It says, do you have any hands-on activities for classrooms of 4th and 5th graders on bats, or any suggestions, curriculum to direct them to or something?
Yep. That's something I've actually wanted to do for a while, is kind of write something up for classes like that. I haven't, but one idea that I've had and I've wanted to do, and I got this from a friend who, I think she had an old mist net. You could probably make one, or find some sort of net to utilize, but she had just made fabric bats out of just felt, and made them varying sizes. and different colors to kind of show different species, and would put those like in the mist net. And so you could kind of pretend to be a bat biologist, getting bats out of the net, measuring their arms, weighing them, figuring out, what type of species it is based on their coloration and their size. And I've always thought that would be something really fun to do. I know she's had a lot of success, and kids love doing that. So that's the very first type of thing I would think of for a bat related program, or a hands-on activity for bats.
Great. And I also popped in the chat pod, Discover Bats by Bat Conservation International. It's actually a multimedia educational kit about bats. It's not free, it does cost money, but that's what it is just, it's like 200 pages of educational activities. And they tell you grade, what subject area, things like that, you can purchase that through Bat Conservation International as well. So, and that's a website too that's got a lot of neat, short, factual information that we've used when we've done a few like bat house programs. So awesome. Thank you. Great. We've got more questions. Let me go back up. Okay, so someone else, homeowners around me use mosquito spraying services. How does that, how much does this affect the bats?
Honestly, I don't know, but it certainly will have an impact, because it's not only going to probably kill insects, kill mosquitoes. Will probably kill other insects, because they're not the only ones who will raise young in water. And a lot of times those chemicals, even if they're not applied to water, they will kill additional insects. So probably to some extent, bats, we only have a couple bats who are very urban, big brown bats and little brown bats being the main two. So it probably will impact them. But even then, most of those bats, they might roost in urban areas, but typically will leave those urban areas and go forage out in more ag or forested habitats. So ultimately, I don't know how much it impacts them, but the fact that it will be it will be reducing the insect population. So therefore it would be reducing the amount of food available.
Okay, great. Another question, how would you exclude bats from a house?
The main thing is, and I'm not a nuisance wildlife person, but the main thing is to, first off, make sure they're not there. I've heard horror stories of people going to exclude bats, and then they've excluded, a lot of times this happens during the summer, they exclude bats, but the juveniles who can't fly yet are still in the bat or in the house. And now those bats end up dying, and now you have decaying bats in your attic. So the first thing is to make sure they're all gone before you do anything. And then find out where they're coming in. It doesn't take much of a gap for a bat to get into a house or a barn. So I would recommend, if you have an idea of where they're coming in and out of, watch that at night to make sure that is where they're coming in and out of. And then at night or later in the fall, like during late fall all the way through early spring, the bats are still going to be in caves. So do it that time of year or at night when you know there's nobody in there, and then you can plug those, exclude them with mesh or what have you, whatever will kind of plug that hole. And they may try to find another one. A lot of times they have more than one way, so it might take a little bit of work. But the main thing is to make sure nobody's home bat-wise before you plug it.
All right, great. Okay, kind of carrying on with that, do bats hibernate in the houses? And if so, let me scroll down. Does this environment help with those white nose fungus issues?
Yeah, so some bats do hibernate in houses or barns throughout the winter. Again, most of those would be big browns, which are very common. Little browns might to an extent, but I think most of them are going to be in the cave. So pretty much when it comes to winter hibernations in a human structure, more often than not, it's going to be a big brown. And I'm not aware of there being signs of whitenose being found on bats in a human structure while they are hibernating. I would imagine it's very unlikely that they would have whitenose for the fungus. The fungus is a cold dwelling, humid, loving fungus. And even though your attic's going to be fairly cold, maybe too cold for that fungus. So yeah, it might help, but I don't know for sure. I don't know if anybody's ever actually looked at the amount of white nose on bats utilizing houses as a hibernation.
Okay. Great. Another question. Told you there'd be lots of questions. Is there reason to believe that there is an immediate threat to the hibernation schedule of our bats at our latitude from climate change?
I don't think climate change is going to have at least an immediate impact on the hibernating bats. The ground temperature stays pretty consistent year round. So even though as the climate warms, it'll take longer for the subterranean climate to feel those impacts as the air temperature and all that stuff. So I don't think that it will impact the hibernating bats when they're hibernating quite as much. It'll definitely impact where they go during the summer. And so that may actually, it's all tied together. So as things warm, bats may start moving and spending summers further and further north. But here in Kentucky and Tennessee and West Virginia and Virginia, we have tons of caves where they hibernate. And so that may mean they're going to have to migrate a lot further during the summer back to those caves to hibernate in, and that might take a toll. But I don't think the climate within those caves, I don't think they will start seeing the changes temperature-wise and all that related to climate change until after we see it elsewhere.
Okay. It says, is there a way to safely for bats and humans to remove bats from an occupied home?
So I've had like a friend. She'd reached out to me because she worked at a library, and they had a bat that was hanging on the side of the building, or maybe it was on the ground. And so mainly, if there's a colony of them, yeah, you have to exclude them and everything. If you have one bat that is in your house flying around or whatever, you're trying to get it out. If you were to pick it up, and this is what I tell my friend also, is make sure you're wearing thick gloves that bat can't bite through. Bats, a lot of times people don't even aren't too worried about it because they're so small and they got tiny teeth. And yes, those teeth are small, but they're pretty sharp. They got to bite through beetle exoskeletons. So if you have an individual bat, you can try and catch it via, I've used like a larger pool net before, or a box. They're super, super agile. So it's very difficult. If you find it on the ground though, and you're just trying to get it out of your house, or it's on the wall or on the ceiling or whatever, and it's asleep or whatever, ideally you just kind of scoop it into a box or something like that. If you did have to handle it, make sure you're wearing very thick gloves so that there is no chance that bat can bite you.
Okay.
Because if you, in the event you get bit or scratched. Post-exposure rabies shots are 5. You get 5 shots. I hear the one at the bite or scratch is painful. It's a big needle. And then you get 4 shots after that. So you don't want to go through that vaccination regimen. And it's also immensely expensive. So best to play it on the side of caution and be super safe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, be super safe, very cautious. Okay, so someone else said, I feel like I'm seeing fewer moths coming to light when I have it on at night. Don't know if this is just normal fluctuation or not.
Yeah, I can't say. A lot of times you do see bats foraging around street lamps. A lot of times those are red bats. They're a habitat generalist. They don't really seem to care about lights and all that. So a lot of times it's red bats and they're foraging on the moths around there. I don't know. I haven't noticed that. It could be simply, fluctuation in this year's hatch, or if you've noticed this over multiple years, there could be something more at play. I don't know. I've not noticed that myself, but I also, I'm not in a urban area, and we don't do a lot of urban work. So I'm not sure that I've noticed that.
Okay. Another question, what are the predominant species in central Kentucky?
Definitely big browns and reds. We like to joke that they're taking over the world, which, if we're losing our smaller bats because of Whitenose Syndrome, that is very unfortunate, but at least these other bats seem to be hopefully kind of picking up the slack. Not really slack, but that gap. So big browns and reds are certainly the most common. Evening bats, possibly as a result of the decrease in Myotis species because of Whitenose Syndrome, have started increasing. We've noticed that the past several years that we're catching more and more evening bats. So those 3 here in central Kentucky are the most common. Hoya bats are also pretty common. They're widespread. They're spread throughout the entire country. So they're definitely here, probably not quite in the numbers as the others though.
Great. All right, well, I think if anybody else has a question, pop that in the chat box. But right now it appears that is all for the questions for our first session for Gregg on bats. We greatly appreciate you joining us today. It's been a very informative session, very interesting. I know bats are one of those things that we don't know a lot about. Most people don't, and it's really good to get more information, like you said, to kind of demystify them. And so this has been, I think, a great opportunity for our Master Naturalist and those that aren't part of the Master Naturalist program to get to learn more about bats today. So we really appreciate that. And if you have any further words, anything else you'd like to leave with us?
Nope, not really. I just take the one thing I do encourage people to do is, like, as a bat biologist, since I get to work at night, like the night world is pretty fascinating, and a lot of people don't ever get to experience it much. So just get out and enjoy the night a little bit. Just sit outside and enjoy the night skies and watch. Definitely at sunset is when bats are most active, and so watching bats fly around at night is really neat, especially if you have a pond nearby or a lake. Go and watch bats as they fly, get water and forage. It never ceases to just fascinate me watching them fly. And I meant to mention this earlier. So when they're, people think they're bad flyers because of how erratic they're flying. A lot of times they're flying that way is because they're tracking an insect and they use their wings to grab that insect and bring it into their mouth. Other bats will also use their tail membrane. So they fly up to it, scoop the bug into their tail membrane, lean forward, and eat that bug out of their tail membrane. So that's why they are very erratic flyers, is not only are they chasing after insects that are flying every which direction, they're also catching them with their wings and their tails. And so, yeah, it's just always fascinating to just sit out there and watch them fly around and do their thing. So I encourage that.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I totally agree. It's one of those things we always do with camp kids. If we've got a light around and as dusk approaches, especially down in Robinson Forest, is actually watch the bats come out of the roof down there. But so yeah, it is. It's a very interesting time of the day that we don't always seem to notice. So. Lots of great, everyone's been complimentary. Greg saying thank you. This is giving them some great ideas for things to do with their clubs when it gets closer to Halloween. So this has been a lot of fun. Also, we'll mention Greg, I think, is going to join us again on From the Woods Today in October. I believe it's October 27th. Renee, correct me if I'm wrong. So he'll also be on with a shorter segment, but on the From the Woods Today video show that we do every week as well. Yes, Renee says that it is the 27th of October. So you can come see Greg again. And again, this has been recorded and it will be posted at the website that I popped into the chat pot, which is the Kentucky Naturalist, Master Naturalist. And then remember, you want to hit the backslash, type in agents after that as well. So that'll take you to all of the other recorded content that we have in that program today. And Renee's popped in the link for From the Woods Today as well. If you want to check out those there too. So again, thank you, Greg. We really appreciate you joining us today. I think great questions and really great information. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. I always want to know more about bats. You know, we'll use little wildlife acoustics, the sound things that we hook to an iPad, but you don't never know how good those are. And then I don't really know much about bats. So except for, oh, that's what it says it is out there. So
yeah, and it's always neat. Those are good educational tools too, because you can see what it tells you when a bat's flown over, and it kind of tells you what the species possibly is. And I can't remember if that one has a screen that actually shows you the sonogram, but that's always
it does. Yeah.
See the sonogram on there too. It's like, hey, this is what a bat call looks like.
Yeah, awesome. Well, again, thank you, Greg. I appreciate it very much. And for participants, if you are in extension, make sure you've signed up for this through KERS and then pop your name in the chat pod so Dr. Ellen Crocker can give you credit for attending this session. For all of you all that are Master Naturalists, you want to make sure you just kind of tuck away a little note of this, that you participated in this training session, because you can count it towards your continuing credit education hours in the Master Naturalist program. As well. And I did want, for those of you who may not be a Master Naturalist and might be interested in becoming a Master Naturalist, we are having an online training starting in September, actually on September 3rd, for a fall cohort of Master Naturalist. It's going to run September 3rd through December 17th. Every Friday, we will do an online Zoom training covering topics from ecoregions, soils, water, botany, wildlife, entomology, archaeology, and tons more. You can join us via Zoom, watch those. It's Fridays at 10 a.m. Eastern, 9 o'clock Central, and they will be recorded. So if you can't join at that Friday or something, you all can go back. We'll have that website link in there. Go back and watch that at a little bit later date and take that educational quiz for your credit on that class. More information is being posted on the Kentucky Master Naturalist website about how to register for this upcoming cohort. The cost is $100 for the cohort, but there are scholarships for those who need assistance. And in addition to doing the online Zoom trainings for this fall cohort, we will also be doing winter and spring hands-on field trips to help complete that training for this next series of Master Naturalist trainings. So hopefully you'll join us if you're not a Master Naturalist. And if you've got any questions, please reach out to myself Laurie Thomas or to Dr. Ellen Crocker, and we'll be happy to try to answer your questions, point you in the right direction. But again, I put the address in. Yes, I was going to say, may certified master naturalists join the online Zoom training for a review? Absolutely, you may. And you can even, I put the link to our website where you can actually go back and watch the ones that we did this past spring as well, with lots of other additional information. But you are more than welcome to join us on that as well. Next week, we've got coming up Prescribed Fire with Josh Lillipop from the Office of Kentucky State Nature Preserves. And then on August 20th, Megan Bulin from the University of Kentucky is going to talk all about mushrooms, that fantastic fungi. And Friday, August 27th, we have lichens with Kendall McDonald, and it's a great program. She's done it with some of our 4-H academies, and I've seen her do it in person at Pine Mountain Settlement School. So it's really interesting to learn about something that we see everywhere, but we maybe don't know much about. So hopefully you can join us for the next 3 Zoom sessions. And maybe even join us for, remember we have the 2 upcoming field trips for Master Naturalists. That's going to be Explore the Elkhorn on August 31st. And that is, and there's information up on the Kentucky Master Naturalist website, a flyer information, register for that because registration is required and there is a fee of $40. But that one's cool. We're going to do that with Canoe Kentucky out on the Elkhorn. And then we've got another one, Cook Wild Field Day down at Robinson Forest on September 15th. And that one, the fee is $20 for that. And both of those you have to register for as well. So hopefully we'll see you at the rest of our Zoom, summer Zoom sessions, and maybe even see you at one of the in-person field trips too. I did see there is another question. I think it was, is the Master Naturalist series only for extension staff or for the general public as well? This time it's opened up to everyone. So extension, say if you didn't get to do it last spring, it just didn't fit your schedule, or you only got to do 1 or 2 of them and then things went crazy, please join us this fall. Extension may join, but also please share this with your constituents in your county because it is open to the public as well. All right, awesome. Well, I think that's it. Thank you again, Greg. We appreciate it. And everybody take care. Have a great weekend. And hopefully we'll see you next Friday when we learn more about prescribed fire. Thank you, Greg.
Yep, you're welcome. It was a pleasure.
All right, bye-bye.